His stepmom dumped him on the street after his mother died. Cowboy showed and promised he'd never be alone. The morning came gray and cold to Willow Creek. Frost painted the small windows of the Carter home. Inside, a single fire crackled in the stove, fighting hard against the chill. Eli Carter stood on a wooden stool, stirring a pot of oats. His breath made little clouds in the air. "Not too fast," his mother said from her chair by the fire. Her voice was soft, but Eli heard the tired scratch in it. "You'll splash it out." Eli slowed down. He looked back at her. Clara Carter sat wrapped in an old quilt, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was pale, paler than yesterday. Dark circles hung under her eyes like little shadows. But she smiled at him, and that smile still had all its warmth. "I got it, Ma," Eli said. He tried to sound brave. He carried a small bowl to her, holding it careful with both hands like it was made of gold. He set it in her lap and tucked the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "You take good care of me," Clara whispered. She reached up and brushed a bit of hair from his forehead. Her fingers were cold. "Better than any grown man could. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today?" Now back to the story. Eli sat down on the floor beside her chair. He watched her take a small spoonful. She barely ate these days. The doctor had come twice last week. Both times he had left without smiling. "Ma," Eli said. His voice went quiet. "Are you going to get better soon?" The room got still. Only the fire spoke, popping and hissing. Clara set down her spoon. She looked at her son for a long moment. There was so much love in her eyes that it almost hurt to see. "Come here," she said. Eli climbed up beside her. He was too big for it now, but neither of them cared. He pressed his head against her shoulder like he had when he was small. "I want you to listen to me," Clara said. "Real close, all right?" "All right." Life doesn't always go the way we want it to. Sometimes it takes things from us. Things we love. She stroked his hair, slow and gentle. "But there's one thing life can never take from you. You know what that is?" Eli shook his head. "Love," Clara said. "The love I have for you doesn't go anywhere. Not ever. Even if I'm not here to say it, it stays. It stays right inside you, warm as this fire. You understand?" Eli felt his throat get tight. Hot tears stung his eyes. "Don't talk like that, Ma. You're going to be here. You have to be." "Oh, my sweet boy." She kissed the top of his head. "You will always be loved. Always. I promise you that. And a promise from your ma is the strongest thing there is." Eli wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. He did not want to let go. He was afraid that if he did, she might slip away like smoke. They sat like that a long while, mother and son, the frost melting slow on the windows as the pale sun climbed. The day passed quiet. Eli did the chores. He fed the chickens and split what little kindling they had. He fixed Clara warm broth and read to her from the old worn Bible until her eyes grew heavy. That evening, Eli helped his mother to bed. He plumped her thin pillow. He pulled the blankets up to her chin. "Sleep good, Ma," he said. "I will. You too." She caught his hand and squeezed it. "Good night, Eli." He blew out the candle and went to his own little cot in the corner. Soon his slow breathing filled the room. But Clara did not sleep. When she was certain her boy was deep in dreams, she pushed herself up. Her whole body ached. Slow and careful, she moved to the shelf where Eli kept his treasures. She lifted down the small wooden box, the one her own father had carved long ago. From beneath her pillow, she took a sealed envelope. On the front, in her neatest hand, she had written one name: Caleb Whitmore. She held it a moment, her thumb tracing the letters. Then she tucked it gently down beneath Eli's marbles and his bird feather and his little tin soldier. "Please," she whispered into the dark. Watch over him for me. She closed the lid without a sound. Eli woke to silence, not the good kind, not the quiet of early morning when the birds are just starting up. This was a heavy silence, a silence that pressed down on the whole room like a wet blanket. He lay still for a moment on his cot. The fire had burned down to gray ash. Cold had crept back into every corner of the little house. "Ma?" he called. No answer. Eli sat up. He rubbed his eyes and looked over to her bed. She was there, tucked under the blankets just as he had left her. Her face was turned toward the window. The pale morning light touched her cheek. "Ma, you want breakfast?" Still she did not stir. Eli slid off his cot. His bare feet touched the cold floor. He walked over slow, something tight and scared growing in his chest. "Ma?" He reached out and touched her shoulder. It was cold, too cold. "Ma." His voice cracked. He shook her gently, then harder. "Ma, wake up. Please wake up." But Clara Carter did not wake. Her face was peaceful. There was no pain in it now, no tired lines. She looked almost like she was smiling in her sleep, but her chest did not rise. Her hands did not move. Eli sank down to his knees beside the bed. He took her cold hand in both of his and pressed it to his cheek. "You promised," he whispered. "You said you'd be here. You promised." The tears came then. They came and would not stop. He stayed there on the floor, holding his mother's hand until the sun climbed high enough to fill the room with cold morning light. The days that followed passed like a bad dream. The neighbor woman came and helped lay Clara out proper. Word went around town quick. By afternoon, Martha Voss arrived in her black dress, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Martha was Eli's stepmother. She had married his father years back, before his father passed. She had never been warm. But Eli had hoped in his aching heart that grief might soften her, that she might pull him close and tell him it would be all right. She did not. "Well," Martha said, standing over Clara's still body. She did not cry. She did not even look sad. "That's that, then." Eli watched her. He waited for something. A kind word. A hand on his shoulder. Anything. But Martha only turned and began looking around the little house, her sharp eyes moving over the furniture, the shelves, the small things Clara had saved up over the years. The funeral was simple. A pine box, a hole in the cold ground at the edge of the churchyard. The preacher said words about ashes and dust and the mercy of the Lord. A handful of townsfolk stood by with their hats in their hands. Eli stood alone at the front. He held the small wooden box tight against his chest, the one his grandfather had carved. It was all he had left of her now. Martha stood behind him. When the box was lowered down, Eli heard her sigh, not with sorrow, with impatience, like she had somewhere better to be. "Bye, Ma," Eli whispered to the fresh dirt. "I love you." He did not know how he would go on, but he told himself that at least he still had a home. At least he had someone. Martha was not kind, but she was family. She would take care of him. She had to. His mother had asked her to. 3 days after the funeral, Eli came back from fetching water at the well. He pushed open the door, hoping maybe, just maybe, things might feel a little more like home today. Maybe there would be a fire going. Maybe there would be supper. Instead, he froze in the doorway. Trunks stood open on the floor. Clothes were folded in stacks. Dishes were wrapped in cloth and packed away in crates. The shelves were bare. Even Clara's quilt was gone, stuffed down into one of the bags. Martha stood in the middle of it all, wrapping a plate in an old newspaper. She looked up when the door opened. "There you are," she said. "Set that water down and stay out of the way. I've got packing to do." Morning came gray and cold. Eli had not slept much. He lay on his cot, listening to Martha move about the house in the dark. dragging trunks, snapping bags shut. Now, with the first pale light coming through the window, she stood at the door and called to him. "Get up, we're leaving." Eli sat up quick. His heart gave a little jump. Leaving. Maybe that was good. Maybe Martha had a plan, a new place, a fresh start somewhere they could put the sadness behind them. He pulled on his clothes and grabbed his mother's wooden box. He would not leave that behind. Not ever. Outside, the wagon was already loaded high, trunks and crates and bags, all roped down tight. Martha climbed up onto the seat and took the reins in her gloved hands. "Come on then," she said. Eli climbed up beside her. The wagon rolled forward. The wheels creaked over the frozen ruts in the road. He held the box in his lap and watched the little house grow small behind them, the house where his mother had lived and laughed and died. He did not ask where they were going. He was afraid to. He just held on and hoped. The road took them into Willow Creek. The town was just waking up. Shopkeepers were sweeping their porches. A man led a mule down the street. Smoke curled up from the chimneys. Martha pulled the wagon to a stop right in the middle of the main street. Eli looked around, confused. "Are we meeting someone?" Martha did not answer at first. She wrapped the reins around the brake and turned to face him. Her eyes were flat and hard. "Get down," she said. Eli blinked. "What?" "Get down off the wagon." Slow, unsure, Eli climbed down. His boots landed in the dust. He looked up at her, still holding the box against his chest. Martha reached back and pulled out an old coat. It was worn thin at the elbows, one of his father's from years ago. She dropped it down to him. He caught it against his body. "Listen to me," Martha said. Her voice was cold and quick, like she wanted to be done with it. "Your mother's gone. There's no money. Not a cent. I can't feed myself, let alone another mouth. I can't keep you." The words did not make sense to Eli. He stood there staring up at her. "But," he said, "but you're taking me somewhere, aren't you? Somewhere safe?" "I'm going where I can start over," Martha said. "And I can't do it dragging a child behind me. You can't just leave me here." His voice climbed high and thin. "Ma asked you to take care of me. She asked you. You promised her." Martha's mouth twisted. "Promises made by dead folks don't pay bills, boy. Your mother's not here to keep track anymore. Please." Eli grabbed at the side of the wagon. His fingers shook. "Please don't go. I'll work. I'll do anything. I won't eat much, I promise. I'll be good." "You'll find someone," Martha said, looking straight ahead now, not at him. "This town's full of folks. Someone'll take you on. Ask around." She picked up the reins. "Martha, please." Eli's voice broke apart. "Please don't leave me. Please." But she snapped the reins and the horse stepped forward. The wagon lurched into motion. Eli let go of the side and stumbled back. He watched the wheels turn, watched the trunks and crates sway, watched his stepmother's straight back grow smaller and smaller down the dusty street. He wanted to run after her. His legs would not move. The wagon reached the end of the street. It turned, and then it was gone, swallowed up by the morning and the distance, leaving nothing behind but a low cloud of dust that hung in the cold air. Eli stood alone in the middle of the road. He looked down at the coat in one hand and the wooden box in the other. He looked up and down the street. The townspeople had stopped what they were doing. The shopkeeper leaned on his broom. A woman with a basket paused on the walk. A few men stood near the feed store, watching. They all looked at him. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Eli's throat went tight. His eyes burned. Slow, he walked to the wooden storefront at the edge of the street. He sank down against it, right there in the dirt, and pulled the old coat around his shoulders. He held the box tight against his chest. The townspeople watched in silence, and Eli understood, deep in his chest where it hurt the most, that he had no one left in all the world. The afternoon sun hung low and pale over Willow Creek when Caleb Whitmore rode back into town. His wagon was loaded with the supplies he could barely afford: a few sacks of feed, some nails, a coil of new fence wire. He had counted every coin twice before he handed them over. The ranch was hanging on by a thread, and everybody knew it. Caleb knew it best of all. He kept his hat low and his eyes forward. He did not like coming into town. Too many folks, too many looks, too many people who remembered the man he used to be, back before the winter that took everything from him. So he was not looking for trouble when he saw the crowd. It was gathered near the feed store, a small knot of people standing around like they did not quite know what to do with themselves. Caleb slowed the wagon out of habit, the way a man slows near anything that seems wrong. He followed their eyes. There, against the wooden storefront, sat a boy. Just a boy, small and thin, wrapped up in a coat too big for him, holding a little wooden box against his chest, like it was the only thing keeping him alive. His face was pale. His eyes were red from crying, but he was not crying now. He just sat there still as stone, staring at nothing. Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked away. Not my business, he told himself. He clicked his tongue and gave the reins a shake, meaning to drive on past. He had his own load to carry. His own grief filled him up to the brim, and there was no room left in a man for somebody else's. But the wagon rolled slow, and as it passed, the boy looked up. Their eyes met, and Caleb felt something turn over inside him, something old and buried and full of ache. He knew that look. He had seen it before. He had seen it in the eyes of his own little girl, in those last dark days when the fever burned her up, and there was nothing he could do but hold her hand and watch. It was the look of a child who had run clean out of hope. A child who had learned, too young, that the world could take everything and leave you with nothing. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. He sat there a long moment, the reins loose in his hands. His heart pounded against his ribs. "Ride on," said the part of him that had spent years building walls. "Ride on and don't look back. You couldn't save them. You can't save him." But he could not ride on. Not this time. Caleb climbed down from the wagon. His boots hit the dirt. The crowd shifted and made room as he walked toward the boy. He crouched down in front of him, slow and careful, the way he would approach a frightened colt. "Hey there, son," Caleb said. His voice was low and rough, gentle as he could make it. "Where's your family?" The boy's lip trembled. He held the box tighter. "She left," he whispered. 2 words. That was all. But they went straight through Caleb like a knife. She left. He knew what those words cost. He knew what it was to be left alone in a cold world with nothing but a box of memories and an empty place where love used to be. Caleb looked at the boy's thin coat, at his shaking hands, at the tears drying on his dirty cheeks, and he made a choice he never thought he would make again. He pulled off his own heavy coat, the good one, warm and worn soft with years. He draped it over the boy's small shoulders. "You listen to me now," Caleb said. He put a hand on the boy's arm, steady and sure. "You won't be facing this world alone anymore. You hear me? Not while I've got breath in my body." The boy looked up at him, and something flickered in those tired eyes, something small, something like hope. "Come on," Caleb said, standing and holding out his hand. "Let's get you home." The boy took it. Together they walked to the wagon, and Caleb lifted him up onto the seat. Then he climbed up beside him, took the reins, and turned the horse toward the ranch, riding out of town as the sun sank low and gold behind the hills. The ranch came into view as the last light faded from the sky. It was not much to look at. The house sat low and gray against the hills, its wood weathered by too many hard winters. The porch sagged a little on one side. The barn beyond it leaned as if it were tired. A few fence posts stood crooked in the failing light, and the field stretched out empty and quiet in the dusk. But it was home. It was all Caleb had left. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and set the brake. For a moment, neither of them moved. The horse blew out a breath and stamped a hoof in the cooling dirt. "Well," Caleb said, "this is it." Eli did not answer. He sat very still, clutching the wooden box in his lap, his eyes taking in the worn old house. Caleb could see him bracing for something. Waiting, maybe, for Caleb to change his mind, to say he had made a mistake, to send him off into the dark. Caleb knew that feeling. He climbed down and came around to the boy's side. "Come on now," he said. "Let's get you inside before the cold sets in." Eli slid down from the seat. His feet hit the ground, and he stood there small and uncertain, wrapped in Caleb's big coat. Caleb led the way up the sagging steps and pushed open the door. Inside, the house was dim and quiet. Caleb lit a lamp, and the warm glow spread over a plain front room. There was a table with 2 chairs, though only one had been used in a long while. A cold hearth, a few shelves. It was clean, but it was empty. It had the look of a place where a man lived alone and had stopped trying to make it anything more. Eli stepped inside, slow, like he was afraid the floor might not hold him. His eyes moved around the room and stopped. On the shelf near the window stood a small picture, a woman with kind eyes, a little girl with a gap-toothed smile. Caleb felt his chest tighten. He looked away from the picture, the way he always did, and busied himself with the fire. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. Eli gave a small nod. Caleb worked in silence, coaxing a flame to life in the hearth. As the wood caught and crackled, he set about fixing supper. It was simple fare. Beans and bacon and biscuits from that morning, warmed up on the stove. His hands knew the work, but his mind kept slipping, kept drifting to another time when this house was full of light and laughter, when a little girl waited at that table, when a woman hummed while she cooked. He blinked hard and set the plates down. They ate quiet. Eli was careful, taking small bites, watching Caleb from the corner of his eye. But slowly, the food and the warm fire seemed to ease something in the boy. His shoulders came down from around his ears. He finished everything on his plate. When they were done, Caleb cleared the dishes. Then he took the lamp and nodded toward the back of the house. "Come on," he said. "Let me show you where you'll sleep." He led Eli down a short hall to a small room. It had gone unused for years, but Caleb had a bed frame there and a mattress that only needed airing. He found an old quilt in a chest and shook it out. He worked in silence, tucking the sheets, smoothing the quilt, setting the pillow just so. His throat felt thick the whole time. When he was done, he stepped back. "It ain't fancy," Caleb said, "but it's warm, and it's yours." Eli stood in the doorway, still holding his box. He looked at the little bed. Then he looked up at Caleb, and there was that fear again, that waiting for the other shoe to drop. Caleb crouched down so he was level with the boy. "Listen to me," he said. "As long as you need a home, this ranch is your home. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to worry it'll be taken. You're staying here, and that's the truth of it." Eli woke before the sun. The room was still dark, but he was already awake, his heart beating fast. For a moment, he did not know where he was. Then he remembered. The ranch, the old house, the man named Caleb. He lay very still and listened. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. He heard the creak of floorboards, the soft clink of a pot. Caleb was up. Eli threw back the quilt and pulled on his clothes quick, his fingers fumbling in the cold. He did not want Caleb to think he was lazy. He did not want to give him any reason. Boys who caused trouble got sent away. Eli knew that better than anyone. He hurried out to the front room, his box tucked under his arm because he could not bear to leave it behind. Caleb stood at the stove, stirring something in a pan. He looked up, and his eyebrows rose. "You're up early," he said. "I can work," Eli said quickly. The words came out in a rush. "I don't eat much. I can carry things and clean and whatever you need. I won't be no trouble." Caleb went still. He set down the spoon and looked at the boy for a long moment. Something crossed his face, something soft and sad all at once. "Sit down and eat first," he said gently. "Chores can wait for a full belly." Eli sat. He ate fast, watching Caleb the whole time. When they were done, Caleb handed him a smaller coat, one that must have belonged to someone long ago. It fit almost right. Then they stepped out into the cold morning air. The sky was turning pink over the hills. Frost sparkled on the grass. The barn loomed ahead, and Eli could hear the horses stirring inside. "Now," Caleb said, walking slow so Eli could keep up. "On a ranch, there's always work to be done. Feeding, watering, mucking stalls, mending. It never really ends." He glanced down at the boy. "Everybody here pulls their weight. That's how it's always been." Eli nodded fast. "I'll work hard, I promise." Caleb stopped walking. He crouched down again the way he had the night before. "That ain't what I mean, son," he said. "You don't work here to keep your bed. You work here because that's what family does. We help each other. When the work is shared, it don't feel so heavy. You understand?" Eli did not understand. Not really. But he nodded anyway. The days that followed were long and full. Caleb showed him how to scoop grain for the horses and how to fill the trough without spilling. He showed him how to hold a curry comb and brush a horse's coat until it shone. Eli was scared of the big animals at first, but the horses had gentle eyes, and one of them, a brown mare named Biscuit, nuzzled his shoulder and made him laugh. It was the first time he had laughed in a long while. Slowly, something in Eli began to loosen. He stopped waiting for Caleb to yell. He stopped flinching when the man came near. He started asking questions, small ones at first, then more. By the end of the week, Caleb walked him out to a broken stretch of fence along the north field. "Storm knocked this rail loose a while back," Caleb said. He handed Eli a hammer that was almost too big for his hands. "Time you learned to fix something." He showed the boy how to line up the rail, how to hold the nail steady, how to swing without smashing his thumb. Eli's first few swings missed. The nail bent. His face went red with worry. "Easy now," Caleb said. "Ain't no rush. Try again." Eli took a breath. He lined up the nail. He swung. This time it went in straight. He swung again and again until the rail was set firm and solid. He gave it a push. It did not budge. He stepped back, breathing hard, and looked up at Caleb. Caleb was smiling. A real smile, one that reached all the way to his eyes. "Well now," he said, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Would you look at that? You did good, Eli. Real good." Eli felt warmth spread through his chest. And Caleb, looking at the mended fence and the proud boy beside it, felt something warm too. Something he had thought was gone for good. The rain came down soft and steady, tapping on the roof like tiny fingers. It had started that morning and had not let up. The fields were too wet for fence work, and the horses stayed snug in the barn. So Caleb had brought a crate of tools inside, and now he sat by the window, scraping rust off an old hinge with slow, careful strokes. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor near the fire. His wooden box rested in his lap. He had not opened it much since coming to the ranch. It had felt too heavy somehow, like opening it might let out all the sadness he had packed away. But the rain made the house feel quiet and safe, and today he wanted his mother near. He lifted the lid slow. Inside were small things. A ribbon, blue and faded, that his mother used to tie in her hair. A tin thimble. A pressed flower gone brown and papery with age, a comb with a few teeth missing. He touched each one gentle, like they might break. At the bottom lay a folded handkerchief. He unfolded it and pressed it to his face. It still smelled faintly of her, of soap and something sweet he could not name. His eyes stung. Caleb glanced up from his work. He did not say anything. He just kept scraping the hinge, giving the boy his space. But Eli could feel the man watching, quiet and kind. This was hers, Eli said softly. He held up the ribbon. She'd let me tie it sometimes. I wasn't no good at it, but she never fussed. Caleb set down the hinge. She sounds like she was a fine woman. She was. Eli's voice cracked. She always said things would be all right, even when they weren't. Caleb nodded slow. Sometimes saying it is how folks make it true. Eli went quiet. He kept sorting through the box, laying each item careful on the floor beside him. When the box was near empty, he ran his fingers along the bottom and he felt something odd. An edge. A seam where there should not have been one. He pressed on it. A little wooden panel shifted. His heart jumped. Caleb, he said. There's something under here. Caleb rose from his chair and crossed the room. He knelt beside the boy, his knees popping, and looked down into the box. Go on, he said gently. Open it. Eli slid the panel free. Beneath it lay a folded envelope, yellowed at the corners. The paper was soft from being pressed so long. On the front, in careful handwriting, was a single name, Caleb Whitmore. Eli stared at it. It's got your name, he whispered. Why's it got your name? Caleb did not answer for a long moment. He reached out and took the envelope with hands that trembled just a little. He turned it over. The seal was still shut. That's your mama's writing, he said quiet. You knew her? Eli asked. I'm not sure, Caleb said, but something in his face said he was not so certain of that. He broke the seal careful, like it was made of glass. He unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the words, and Eli watched his face change. First confusion, then something soft and stunned. Read it, Eli said. Please. Caleb cleared his throat. His voice came out rough. Dear Mr. Whitmore, he read, you will not remember me, but I have never forgotten you. 3 winters back, when the crops failed and the snow came early, my family had nothing. My husband was sick. Eli was small. We were near to starving. Then one morning we found firewood stacked by our door. And food. Flour and salt pork and beans. Enough to see us through. Caleb stopped. He drew a slow breath. It came again and again all that terrible winter. He read on. We never saw who left it, but folks talked. They said it was the rancher out past the creek, the one who lost his wife and little girl, the one who kept to himself. They said, you never wanted thanks. Caleb's hand shook. Eli sat frozen, listening. I want you to know, Caleb read, his voice near breaking, that your kindness kept my son alive. And if ever the day comes that I cannot care for him, you are the one soul in this world I would trust to do it, because a man who gives when no one is watching has the truest heart of all. The letter fell quiet in the room. Only the rain kept talking, soft against the glass. Caleb sat back on his heels. His eyes stayed on the paper, but he was not reading anymore. He was somewhere far off, somewhere years behind him. His jaw worked like he wanted to speak, but could not find the way. Eli watched him careful. Caleb, you all right? The man did not answer right away. His thumb moved slow over the edge of the paper, back and forth, like he was trying to feel his way through the words. When he finally spoke, his voice came out low and cracked. 3 winters back, he said. I remember that winter. Eli waited. Snow came early that year. worse than folks had seen in a long time, buried the fences, froze the creek solid. Caleb swallowed hard. I couldn't sleep much back then. Still can't some nights. So I'd load up the wagon in the dark and drive out to the families that had it hardest. Left what I could. Didn't want nobody looking at me. Didn't want thanks. He stopped. His eyes shone wet in the firelight. I told myself I did it 'cause it was right, he said. But that weren't the whole truth of it. What was the truth? Eli asked, soft. Caleb looked at the fire. The flames threw a warm glow across his weathered face. After I lost my Sarah and my little girl, he said, I stopped believing I was any good to anybody. Figured I'd failed 'em. Figured if I couldn't save my own family, then what was I worth? His voice broke on the last word. So, I gave things away in the dark, 'cause I couldn't stand nobody seeing me. A man who thinks he's worthless don't want to be looked at. Eli's chest ached. He did not fully understand all of it, but he understood enough. He knew what it felt like to think you were not worth much. Caleb held up the letter. His hand trembled harder now. And all this time, he said, your mama had this tucked away. All this time she believed I had a good heart. She trusted me with the most precious thing she had, and I never even knew her name. A single tear slid down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. I stopped believing in myself, he said quiet. But she never stopped, not for one day, a woman I couldn't hardly picture. She saw something in me I couldn't see no more. The room went still. The fire snapped. The rain drummed on. Eli scooted closer. He looked up at the big man, this cowboy, who had found him alone in the dust and had not ridden away. His own eyes filled. She was right, Eli whispered. You do got a good heart. You took me in when nobody else would. Caleb turned to look at him. Something moved across his face, something breaking loose, something that had been locked up tight for a long, long time. He set the letter down gentle on the floor. Then he reached out and put a heavy, warm hand on the boy's shoulder. Eli, he said. His voice was thick. I got to tell you something, and I want you to hear me plain. Eli nodded, hardly breathing. When I brought you here, Caleb said, I told myself it was 'cause it was the right thing. A boy needs a roof, needs food, and I could give him that. I figured I owed the world that much. He shook his head slow. But that ain't how I feel no more. That ain't how I feel at all. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain began to soften. You ain't a chore to me, son, Caleb said, and his voice broke clean in two. You ain't some burden I took on. Somewhere along the way, you got to be more than that. You got to be family. Eli's lip quivered. Your mama was right to trust me, Caleb went on, tears running free now. And I aim to prove her right every single day I got left. I don't want you here 'cause I have to keep you. I want you here 'cause I can't picture this place or my life without you in it. The weeks rolled by like clouds across a wide sky. Summer settled soft over Whitmore Ranch. The mornings came early and golden, and Eli learned to rise with them. He learned the sound of the rooster before it crowed. He learned which floorboards creaked so he could sneak down to start the fire before Caleb woke. Little things, but they filled him up in a way he had not felt in a long while. He learned to ride too. The first time Caleb set him on a horse, Eli's legs shook so hard he could hardly grip. The mare was old and gentle, a brown thing named Biscuit with kind eyes and a slow way about her. Eli held the reins too tight and sat too stiff, and Biscuit just plodded along like she knew he was scared. Easy now, Caleb had said, walking beside them. You don't ride a horse by fighting her. You ride her by trusting her. Let your body go soft. She feels everything you feel. It took days, but slow Eli got the hang of it. He learned to move with the horse instead of against her. He learned to feel the rhythm of her steps in his own bones. And one bright morning, he sat up tall in the saddle and rode across the open field all by himself, the wind pulling at his hair, and he laughed out loud. A real laugh, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep. Caleb stood by the fence and watched. He did not say much, but there was a look on his face, a soft and quiet look that Eli caught out of the corner of his eye. It stayed with him all day. The animals took to the boy quick. The chickens followed him around the yard. The barn cat, a mean old Tom who scratched most folks, curled up in Eli's lap without a fuss. Even the ornery mule let the boy brush him down without kicking. Caleb said he had never seen anything like it. "You got a gift with critters," he told Eli one evening, leaning on a fence post. "They know a good soul when they meet one. Animals ain't fooled easy." Eli ducked his head and smiled. He was not used to praise. It still felt strange and warm, like standing near the fire after a long walk in the cold. He worked hard. He mended fences alongside the ranch hands. His small hands blistered at first, then grew tough. He hauled water and forked hay and learned to read the sky for coming weather, the way Caleb read it, squinting at the far hills. He fell into bed each night worn clean through and slept without dreaming of the dusty street where Martha had left him. That memory was still there, but it was quieter now. Farther off. One evening, the two of them sat down to supper at the worn wooden table. Caleb had cooked up beans and cornbread and a bit of salt pork. The lamp glowed soft between them. Outside, the crickets sang and the last light faded pink over the fields. Eli ate slow. He kept glancing up at Caleb, like he had something on his mind, but did not quite know how to say it. Caleb noticed. "Something eating at you, son?" Eli set down his fork. He looked around the little room, at the fire, at the framed picture on the wall, at the man across from him with the tired eyes and the kind, weathered face. "Caleb," he said, quiet, "can I tell you something?" "Course you can." Eli was silent a moment. His throat felt tight. "This place," he said. "The ranch." He swallowed. "It feels like home, like a real one." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't think I'd ever have that again. After Mama, I figured I lost it for good." The room went still. Only the crickets and the crackle of the fire. Caleb did not answer right away. He looked at the boy across the table, at the way the lamplight caught his hopeful, careful face, and something turned over deep inside his chest. He had told himself for weeks that he was just giving the boy a roof. Just doing right. But sitting there now, watching Eli wait for his answer, Caleb understood plain what he had become to this child. Not a stranger, not a keeper, something more. The thing the boy had lost and needed most, a father. The next morning came bright and clear, the sky washed clean and blue after a light rain in the night. Eli was out in the yard tossing feed to the chickens when he heard the wagon. He knew the sound before he saw it, the slow creak of wheels, the plod of a tired horse. He looked up, and his heart dropped clean out of his chest. Martha Voss sat perched on the wagon seat, dressed finer than he had ever seen her. A blue dress with lace at the collar, a hat with a ribbon. She looked like a different woman, but her face was the same thin mouth, the same cold eyes that had watched him from the wagon that awful day and never once looked back. Eli did not move. The feed bucket hung frozen in his hand. "Eli," Martha called out, sweet as sugar. "Oh, my dear boy, look at you." She climbed down from the wagon and came toward him with her arms open wide, like she meant to gather him up. But Eli stepped back. His feet knew before his head did. He backed right into the fence and stayed there. Caleb came out of the barn then, wiping his hands on a rag. He took one look at the woman crossing his yard, and his whole body went still and careful. the way a man goes still when he sees a snake in the grass. "Can I help you?" His voice was flat. Martha turned. Her face rearranged itself into something soft and sorry. "You must be Mr. Whitmore, the one who took in my Eli." She pressed a hand to her chest. "I can't thank you enough, truly. When I heard he was safe, I wept with joy." Caleb said nothing. He came and stood between the woman and the boy, easy but plain, so she'd have to go through him to reach Eli. "I made a terrible mistake," Martha went on. Her eyes shone wet, though Caleb noticed no tears actually fell. "I was grieving. I wasn't in my right mind. Losing Clara broke something in me. I never should have left him. I've come to make it right. I've come to take my boy home." "He's got a home," Caleb said. Martha laughed, light and airy, like he'd made a joke. "Of course, and I'm ever so grateful. But blood is blood, Mr. Whitmore. I'm his family. His only family now that his mother's passed. God rest her." She dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Speaking of Clara, the poor thing, she left in such a hurry, we never did settle her things properly." Something flickered in Caleb's chest, a small warning. "Her things," he said. "Her belongings," Martha said. She looked past him now, toward the house, her eyes moving quick over the windows and the door. Papers, letters, anything she might have kept, and there was a box. A little wooden box she was awful protective of. "Did Eli have it with him? When you found him?" Eli's fingers curled tight around the fence rail. "I only ask," Martha hurried on, "because there may be documents inside, important documents, things a boy his age wouldn't understand, things that ought to be looked after by an adult." She smiled again, but it did not reach her eyes. "For his own good, you understand." Caleb watched her. He watched the way her gaze slid over the boy and kept going, like Eli was a fence post, a thing in the way. She had not asked how he was sleeping. She had not asked if he was eating. She had not knelt down or touched his hair or spoke to him gentle the way a woman speaks to a child she has missed. She had asked about a box. Twice now. "You come all this way," Caleb said slow, "and you ain't hardly looked at him." Martha blinked. "Pardon?" "The boy." Caleb tipped his head toward Eli. "You say you come to take him home, but you ain't asked him a single thing about himself. You asked about papers. You asked about a box." His voice stayed low, but it had gone hard as flint. "Seems to me a woman who missed a child would want to know how he's getting on, not what he's carrying." The color rose in Martha's cheeks. For just a breath, her mask slipped. Her eyes went sharp and greedy, and Caleb saw it plain as day. She had not come back for Eli at all. The town of Willow Creek sat quiet in the morning heat when Caleb tied his horse outside the courthouse. It was a plain building, made of gray stone, with a flag hanging still in the windless air. Inside, the halls were cool and smelled of old paper and dust. Judge Samuel Reed sat behind a wide desk stacked high with books and papers. He was a heavy-set man of 60, with silver hair and kind eyes, hidden behind small round spectacles. When he saw Caleb in the doorway, his face broke into a warm smile. "Well now, Caleb Whitmore, I'd near given up on ever seeing you off that ranch of yours." He stood and reached across the desk to shake his hand. "Sit down. Sit. What brings you all this way?" Caleb took his hat off and turned it slow in his hands. He wasn't a man who liked asking for help. Never had been. But he'd lain awake half the night, thinking on Martha's cold eyes, and he knew he couldn't puzzle this out alone. "I got a problem, Samuel," he said. He lowered himself into the chair. "It's about a boy." Then he told him. All of it. The child left sitting in the dirt. The promise he'd made. the weeks that followed, and how the ranch had come alive again with the sound of a young voice. And then Martha, rolling up in her fine blue dress, asking twice about a little wooden box. Samuel listened without a word, his hands folded on the desk. When Caleb finished, the judge leaned back in his chair and took his spectacles off, rubbing at his eyes. "A box?" he said quietly. "And she wanted the papers inside?" "She did." Samuel was quiet a long moment. Then he pushed himself up and crossed to a tall wooden cabinet against the far wall. He pulled open a drawer and began walking his fingers through the files there, one by one. "Carter," he murmured. "Carter. Clara Carter." He stopped. He drew out a thick folder, worn soft at the corners, and carried it back to the desk. He sat and opened it, spreading the papers out under the window light. Caleb leaned forward. "Now this is interesting," Samuel said slow. He tapped one page with his finger. "Clara Carter's people. Her maiden name was Halloway. And the Halloway family, before they passed, they owned a good stretch of land east of here, 200 acres near about." He looked up over the rims of his spectacles. "You know what's coming through that country next spring?" Caleb shook his head. "The railroad." Samuel let the word sit in the air. "The line's been surveyed. It runs straight through the old Halloway property. That land was worth a few dollars an acre a year ago. Once the rails come through," he shook his head, "it'll be worth a small fortune. Men have been buying up parcels all along that route, quiet as thieves." Caleb sat very still. Samuel turned another page. His brow drew down. Then his face changed. "Well, I'll be." He turned the paper around so Caleb could see it. "The land wasn't sold off when Clara married. She kept it. And look here." His finger came down on a line of careful handwriting. "She put the deed in her son's name. Eli Carter. The boy's the legal owner. He inherits the whole of it when he comes of age. Until then, the property's held in trust by his lawful guardian." The room went very quiet. Caleb read the words twice. Held in trust by his lawful guardian. And then it all came together in his mind, piece by piece, the way tracks come clear on soft ground after a rain. Martha hadn't come back for Eli. She'd left him sitting in the dirt because she thought there was nothing. No money, no land, nothing but another mouth to feed. But somewhere along the way, she'd learned the truth. She'd learned about the land and the railroad and the fortune waiting under a 12-year-old boy's name. That was why she'd come back in her fine blue dress with her sweet, empty words. That was why she'd asked about the box and never once about the child. She didn't want to be Eli's mother. She wanted to be his guardian. She wanted the land. Caleb set the paper down slow. His hands weren't quite steady. "She's not after the boy at all," he said low. "She's after what he's worth." Word traveled fast in a town the size of Willow Creek. By the second day, folks were talking of little else. It passed from the mercantile counter to the church steps, from the blacksmith's fire to the porch of the boarding house. A boy left in the dirt, a widowed rancher who took him in, and now the stepmother, back in her fine blue dress, wanting the child returned. The trouble was, nobody could agree on what was right. At the general store, old Mrs. Pruitt set her basket down hard on the counter and shook her head. "That woman is his stepmother," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Married his father, didn't she? Raised him under her own roof. Blood or no blood, the law says a child belongs with his family. You can't just hand a boy off to any stranger who feels sorry for him." "Stranger?" The man beside her turned around. It was Tom Bagley, who ran the feedlot at the edge of town. "You call Caleb Whitmore a stranger? That man pulled my wagon out of the creek 2 winters back and never asked a dime. I seen that boy in town with him last week. Seen the way the child looked up at him. That ain't fear. That's a boy who found himself a home. Mrs. Pruitt sniffed. A home he had no legal right to. Legal right. Tom spat the words. Where was her legal right when she left him sitting on that corner? Half this town watched it happen and did nothing, me included. And I ain't proud of it. That quieted things for a moment, but only a moment. Over at the church, the talk was gentler, but no less divided. Some of the women felt for Martha. A widow alone, they said, must have been desperate to leave the boy. Surely she'd come to her senses. Surely a mother, even a stepmother, deserved a second chance. Others remembered the cold set of her face that day, the way she'd loaded her wagon without once looking back, and they could not make their hearts believe her tears were real. The saloon had its own opinions, louder and less kind. Money changed the shape of a thing. Once word of the railroad got around, and it did get around, some men figured Caleb was no better than Martha. Wasn't he holding a boy worth a fortune? What did anybody really know about his heart? So the town split down the middle, neighbor from neighbor, and the argument grew hotter with every telling. Eli heard it all. He'd ridden into town with Caleb that morning to fetch nails and rope for the north fence. Caleb had gone into the store to settle the bill, and Eli waited outside by the horses, the way he'd learned to do. He liked standing near the animals. They didn't ask him questions. They didn't stare. But the voices carried through the open door and the thin walls, and Eli could not help but hear. His stepmother, the land, the boy. He went still as stone. They were talking about him. All of them, saying his name like he was a thing to be argued over, a sack of grain to be weighed and traded. He heard the word, guardian. He heard Martha's name. He heard a woman say a child belongs with his family, and his stomach twisted up cold and tight. She was coming back for him. The thought landed like a stone dropped into still water, spreading out through his whole body. He pressed his back against the rough boards of the storefront, the same kind of storefront he'd sat against the day she drove away and left him. He remembered the dust, the heat, the way his throat had ached from holding in the crying. He'd thought that was over. He'd thought the ranch was his now, the horses and the wide sky, and the man who set a plate in front of him every morning without being asked. But homes could be taken. He knew that better than anybody. His hands began to shake. He gripped the reins to hide it, staring hard at the ground so no one passing would see the water rising in his eyes. They were going to make him leave. The ride back to the ranch was a quiet one. Eli sat stiff beside Caleb on the wagon seat, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the wood. He did not point out the hawks circling over the hills the way he usually did. He did not ask about the fence or the horses or anything at all. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw set tight, like a boy bracing for a blow he knew was coming. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. He waited until supper was done and the dishes were cleared. Then he found Eli out on the porch steps, sitting alone in the blue light of evening, watching the sun sink low behind the ridge. Caleb lowered himself down beside him. He didn't say anything at first. He'd learned that words came easier when you didn't rush them. "You heard folks talking today," he said at last. It wasn't a question. Eli's shoulders drew up toward his ears. "They said I belong with my family." His voice cracked. "They said she's coming back for me." "Eli, I don't want to go." The words tumbled out fast now like water breaking through a dam. "I don't want to go with her. She left me. She left me on the street and she didn't even look back, and now they're going to make me go anyway, because that's the law." He turned his face away, but not before Caleb saw the tears streaking down his cheeks. Homes get taken. I know it. I already know it. Caleb felt something twist deep in his chest. He reached out slow, the way he'd reach for a spooked colt, and laid his big weathered hand on the boy's shaking shoulder. Listen to me, he said low and steady. I made you a promise. You remember it? Eli sniffed. You said I wouldn't be alone. That's right. And I don't break my promises. Not this one. Not ever. Caleb squeezed his shoulder. There's folks in town gonna talk. Talking's all some people know how to do. But talking don't decide what happens under this roof. You hear me? Eli finally looked up at him, his eyes red and searching. You mean it? I mean it. The boy leaned into him then, sudden and hard, pressing his wet face against Caleb's shirt. Caleb held him. He held him the way he'd once held another small child years ago, in another life. And for a long while, neither of them said a word. They just sat there in the dying light, one broken heart pressed against another. Later, after Eli had gone to bed, Judge Samuel Reed rode out to the ranch. He found Caleb at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and a lamp burning low. Samuel pulled out a chair without asking and settled his old bones into it. Heard you had a hard day in town, the judge said. Caleb turned the cup slowly in his hands. The boy heard everything. Every word. He shook his head. Sat out on that porch, shaking like a leaf, scared to death he's going to get left again. And you told him he won't be. I told him. Caleb was quiet a moment. Then he set the cup down. Sam, I gotta be honest with you. Because if I can't be honest with you, I can't be honest with anybody. He rubbed a hand over his tired face. I don't know if I can do this. Samuel said nothing. He only listened, the way he'd always listened. I had a family once, Caleb went on, his voice rough. A wife, a little girl. I loved them more than my own life, and I couldn't save them. That winter took them, and there wasn't a thing I could do but bury them. His eyes glistened in the lamplight. What business do I have raising another child? What if I fail him too? What if I promise that boy the world and life just takes it away again like it took everything else? The old judge let the words settle. Then he leaned forward, folding his weathered hands on the table. Caleb, he said gently, you think a father is a man who never fails, who never loses, who keeps every storm from ever touching his family's door? He shook his head slow. No such man ever lived, not one. Caleb looked at him. Being a parent was never about being perfect, Samuel said. It's about staying. It's about being the one who's still there when the hard times come, and Lord knows they always come. That boy doesn't need you to save him from every trouble under heaven. He just needs you to choose him, every day, especially the hard ones. The letter came from the county land office on a Tuesday. Caleb had ridden into Willow Creek to ask a few questions, quiet ones about the papers Martha kept waving around town. He didn't expect much, but the clerk, a thin man named Halloran with ink-stained fingers, remembered more than Caleb figured he would. Voss, the clerk said, thumbing through a heavy ledger. Yes, she came in here. Must have been near 2 months back now. Caleb went still. 2 months. Right before the missus passed, I believe. Or maybe just after. Halloran turned the ledger around so Caleb could see. She wanted to know about the Carter land, the parcel out by the railroad line. Asked whose name was on the deed. Asked what it was worth. Caleb stared at the page. There, in cramped handwriting, was Martha's name and the date. A date that came before the afternoon she'd left Eli standing in the dust with nothing but a coat and a wooden box. His mouth went dry. She knew, he said. She knew about the land before she left him. Reckon she did. Halloran shrugged. She seemed real interested. Kept asking whether a stepmother could claim it, whether guardianship changed things. He lowered his voice. I'll be honest, mister. Way she talked, it wasn't like a woman worried about a child. It was like a woman counting money she didn't have yet. Caleb's hands curled slowly into fists on the counter. It all fell into place, cold and ugly. Martha hadn't left Eli because she couldn't afford him. She'd known all along that the boy was worth a fortune. She'd left him because a scared, abandoned child was easier to control than one with money and choices. She had thrown him away like a bad card, planning all the while to pick him back up when the game turned in her favor. "Can I have a copy of this?" Caleb asked, his voice rough. "For a fee." Halloran was already reaching for his pen. "I'll write it out, plain, and sign it. A man ought to know the truth when he's fighting for it." Caleb rode out to the boarding house where Martha was staying with the paper folded tight against his chest. His heart pounded harder than it had in years, not with fear this time. With a slow, burning anger he had not let himself feel in a very long time. She answered the door in a fine dress the color of wine, her hair pinned neat, a soft smile ready on her lips. It vanished the moment she saw his face. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "this is unexpected. You knew about the land." He didn't bother with pleasantries. He held up the paper. 2 months back, you walked into that land office and asked what Eli was worth. Then you dumped him on the street like he was nothing." Something flickered behind her eyes. For just a breath, the soft mask slipped. Then she stepped back and let the door swing open wider. "Come inside," she said. "I won't have you shouting my business into the street." Caleb stepped in. The room was small and plain, at odds with her fine clothes. Martha folded her arms and looked at him with a coldness that made his skin crawl. "All right," she said. "You want the truth?" "Yes. I knew about the land. I knew that dead sister of mine's boy was sitting on more money than either of us will see in a lifetime." Her chin lifted. "And yes, I left him. A frightened boy with no one is a great deal easier to deal with than a coddled one. I always meant to come back for him. The timing simply had to be right." The words landed like stones. Caleb had suspected. Hearing her say it out loud was worse. "You're not fighting for that child," he said quietly. "You're fighting for his money." "I'm fighting for what's mine," Martha snapped. Then she smiled, thin and sharp as a knife. "But here is what you don't understand, Cowboy. It doesn't matter what you found in that dusty little office. It doesn't matter how much that boy loves you or you love him." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I am his stepmother. I am blood by marriage. And the law, Mr. Whitmore. The law favors me. You're nothing to him but a stranger who took him in. Remember that." The morning of the hearing came gray and cool, with a sky full of low clouds that looked like they couldn't decide whether to rain. Caleb woke before dawn. He couldn't sleep anyhow. He stood by the window a long while, watching the light creep across the fields, and thought about all the things that could go wrong. Then he thought about the boy sleeping down the hall, and he made himself stop. He put on his good shirt, the one Clara might have called Sunday clothes. He wet his hair and combed it flat. In the mirror he looked older than he felt. The lines around his eyes cut deep by years of grief and sun. Eli came into the kitchen already dressed. He had tried to comb his own hair, but a stubborn piece stuck up in back. Caleb knelt in front of him and smoothed it down with his thumb. "You scared?" Caleb asked. Eli nodded. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "Me too," Caleb admitted. "But we're going to walk in there together. That's the important part." They rode into town side by side. The closer they got, the more Caleb's stomach twisted. When they reached the courthouse, he understood why the road had felt so quiet. Everyone was already there. The townspeople of Willow Creek stood gathered on the courthouse steps and along the dusty street, men in work clothes, women with shawls pulled tight, children peeking out from behind their mothers' skirts. They turned as one when Caleb and Eli rode up, and a low murmur moved through the crowd like wind through wheat. Caleb tied off the horse. He lifted Eli down, though the boy was near old enough not to need it, and kept a hand on his shoulder as they walked toward the building. He heard the whispers. "That's the boy. The one she left. Cowboy took him in, they say." Caleb kept his eyes forward. Eli pressed close to his side, small and pale, but he did not look away from the crowd either. Caleb felt a flicker of pride at that. A wagon came rolling up the street. Martha stepped down from it in a dress the color of storm clouds, gray silk with black lace at the collar. She looked every inch the grieving, respectable woman. She did not glance at Eli. She walked past the crowd with her chin high, as if their stares meant nothing to her. Judge Samuel Reed arrived last on foot, moving slow the way old men do. He wore a black coat and carried a leather satchel under his arm. He paused when he saw Caleb, and something passed between them. Not a smile, something steadier than that. "Caleb," the judge said quietly. "Samuel. You ready?" Caleb looked down at Eli, then back up. "As I'll ever be." Reed nodded. "Then let's go find the truth." He climbed the steps, and the crowd parted to let him through. Inside, the courthouse was one large room with rows of wooden benches, worn smooth by years of use. The windows let in weak gray light. A long table sat at the front, where Reed took his place. Caleb and Eli sat on one side. Martha sat on the other, alone, her gloved hands folded neat in her lap. The benches filled behind them. Boots scraped. Someone coughed. The whole town, it seemed, had come to watch. Judge Reed rapped his knuckles on the table. The room went still. "We're here today," he began, "to decide the guardianship of Eli Carter. This is not a matter I take lightly. A boy's whole life hangs on what's said in this room." He looked at Martha. "Mrs. Voss, you've filed the claim. You'll speak first." Martha rose. She smoothed her skirts and turned to face the room, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and calm and cold. "Your Honor, I stand here as this child's stepmother, his only living family." She let that word settle. "I married his father. I am blood by marriage, bound to him by law and by name." She turned her gaze slowly toward Caleb. "And that man beside him? He is nothing, a stranger, a rancher who happened upon a grieving child and decided to keep him, the way a man might keep a stray dog." A ripple of anger moved through the crowd. Reed raised a hand for quiet. "Eli belongs with his family," Martha went on. "Not with a stranger who has no legal claim to him whatsoever. The law is clear, Your Honor. Names on paper, ties of marriage, these are what make a family, not sentiment, not a few weeks of pity on a struggling ranch." She sat down, folding her hands once more. Caleb felt Eli tremble beside him. He reached over and covered the boy's small hand with his own rough one. Then he rose to his feet. His heart hammered, but he thought of Clara's letter, folded safe in Reed's satchel. He thought of the winter he'd carried firewood through the snow. He thought of every quiet morning teaching Eli how to gentle a horse, how to read the land, how to be brave. "Names on paper," Martha had said. Caleb drew a slow breath and got ready to prove that love and commitment ran deeper than any title ever could. "Your Honor," Caleb began, "I ain't a man of many words, never have been, so I'll just say what's true." He looked out at the room, at the faces he knew, at the boy beside him. "I found Eli sitting in the dirt on Main Street, alone, holding a box of his mama's things, and I made him a promise that day. I told him he wouldn't face this world alone. I aim to keep that promise. That's all." He sat back down. Reed nodded slowly. "Then let's hear from those who know you." He looked to the benches. "Anyone here wish to speak on this matter?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then a chair scraped. Old Tom Barrett stood up in the back, hat crushed in his hands. He was a lean man with a face like cracked leather. "I'll speak," he said. "Reckon it's time somebody did." He shuffled forward. 10 years back, my family near starved. That winter was the worst any of us ever seen. Snow to the windowsills. Cattle froze standing up. He swallowed. One morning I found firewood stacked outside my door. Then flour. Then salt pork. Never saw who left it. Not till spring, when I caught sight of Caleb Whitmore's tracks in the last of the melt. He turned to face the room. That man saved my children's lives and never asked for a thank you. Never told a soul. That's the kind of man he is. He sat down heavy. Another woman rose. Then another man. One by one, the people of Willow Creek stood and told their stories. A barn raised, a debt forgiven, a sick horse doctored through the night with no charge asked, the room filled with the quiet weight of a good man's whole life, laid bare piece by piece. Then a ranch hand named Pete stood up. He was young, sunburned, awkward in his hands. "I work the Whitmore place," he said. "I seen Caleb before that boy came. He ate every meal alone, barely spoke, worked like he was trying to bury something." Pete looked at Eli. Then this boy showed up, and something changed. I heard Caleb laugh again. First time in years. That boy brought him back to life, and Caleb done the same for him. You can see it, plain as day. Martha's face had gone hard as flint. "This is all very touching," she said sharply, "but kindness is not the same as a legal right. Charity does not make a father." "No," said a slow, steady voice, Judge Reed. "It doesn't. But it tells us something about a man's heart, and a boy's future rests on more than paper." He opened his leather satchel. He drew out a folded letter, worn soft at the creases. "This," Reed said, "was written by Clara Carter, Eli's mother, before she passed. It was addressed to Caleb Whitmore, though he never received it in her lifetime." He unfolded it careful. "With the court's leave, I'll read it aloud." The room went so still, Caleb could hear his own heart. Reed began to read. "Dear Caleb, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and my Eli has need of you. I have never forgotten the winter you saved us, the firewood, the food left in the dark. You never wanted thanks, but I saw, and I have always known that if the world ever failed my son, you would not. You have the truest heart of any man I ever met. If anything happens to me, I ask only this: look after my boy. Show him he is worthy of love. I trust you, Caleb. I always have." Reed lowered the letter. Nobody spoke. Somewhere a woman was crying softly. Then Eli stood up. He was shaking, but he lifted his chin the way Caleb had taught him. "She was right," Eli said, his voice small but sure. "Everybody left me. My mama died. Martha put me on the street and drove away. Nobody wanted me." He turned and looked up at Caleb. "But he did. He chose me when nobody else would. That's what a family is. It's who stays when things get hard." The words hung in the air. Judge Reed set the letter down gentle. His old eyes were wet. He looked long at Martha, then at Caleb and the boy. "I've heard enough," he said. "This court grants temporary guardianship of Eli Carter to Caleb Whitmore, pending further investigation into Mrs. Voss's conduct." The room erupted. Cheers, clapping. Caleb pulled Eli against him and held on tight. And through the courthouse windows, far off across the plains, the sky over the ranch had turned a bruised and swollen black, and the first low growl of thunder rolled in from the west. The morning after the hearing broke soft and golden over Whitmore Ranch. Caleb woke before the sun, the way he always had. But something felt different. The house wasn't empty anymore. Down the hall, in the little room that had been quiet for so many years, He could hear the steady breathing of a sleeping boy. His boy now. Or near enough. He stood in the doorway a long moment, just watching Eli sleep. The child's face was peaceful. No fear pinching his brow. No hand gripping the blanket, like he might be torn away in the night. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Come on," he said gentle, when the sun finally crept over the sill. "Daylight's burning. Ranch don't fix itself." Eli sat up quick, rubbing his eyes. Then he smiled, a real smile, wide and easy. "Yes, sir." They ate together at the kitchen table. Biscuits and coffee for Caleb, biscuits and milk for the boy. Nobody spoke much, but it was a good quiet, a full quiet. "You know," Caleb said, wiping crumbs from his mustache, "we got a heap of work waiting on us. Fences down along the south line. That old barn door's been hanging crooked since spring. Been putting it off?" He looked at Eli. "Reckon two of us can do more than one." Eli straightened in his chair. "I can help. I'm strong." Caleb almost laughed. "I know you are, son." The word slipped out before he could stop it. "Son." Eli went still. His eyes shone. He didn't say anything. He just nodded quick and stared down at his milk like it held some secret. Caleb cleared his throat and stood. "Let's get to it." They worked the whole morning. The sun climbed high and hot, then hid itself behind a thin gray sheet of cloud. Caleb showed Eli how to set a fence post deep and pack the earth tight around it. He showed him how to test the wire, how to feel when it was strung right. Eli soaked it all up, like dry ground drinks rain. He asked 100 questions. Caleb answered every one. By noon, they'd mended a good stretch of the south line. Pete rode out to help with the barn door, and the three of them wrestled it back onto its hinges, sweating and laughing when it finally swung true. "There now," Caleb said, hands on his hips. "Been meaning to do that for a year." Eli wiped his forehead, leaving a smear of dirt behind. "It looks good." "It does," Caleb agreed. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good." But even as he said it, Caleb glanced west. The clouds had thickened. What had been a thin gray sheet was now piling up dark and heavy, stacking on itself like something angry gathering its strength. The air had gone strange and still. The horses in the corral stamped and tossed their heads. Pete squinted at the sky. "Don't like the look of that." "No," Caleb said slow. "Neither do I. Let's get the stock in. Now." They moved fast then. Caleb drove the cattle toward the low shelter of the draw. Eli helped herd the horses into the barn, murmuring to them soft the way he had a gift for. The wind kicked up sudden, snatching at their hats, flinging grit across the yard. By the time the last horse was penned, the light had gone a sickly green. The storm hit just after dark. It came screaming out of the west like a living thing. Rain lashed the windows sideways. Thunder cracked so loud the whole house shook, and lightning split the sky white as noon. Caleb stood at the window with Eli pressed close beside him, watching the world come apart. A gust tore across the yard. Out in the flashing dark, Caleb saw the south fence they'd mended that very morning buckle and go down, post after post, ripping clean out of the ground. A section of the barn roof peeled back with a shriek of nails. Water rushed in silver sheets across the pasture, drowning the low ground where the cattle sheltered. "No," Caleb breathed. "No, no." Eli grabbed his sleeve, his small face pale in the lightning. "Caleb, what do we do?" Caleb had no answer. He could only watch as the storm tore apart everything he'd fought so hard to keep. The morning came quiet and cruel. The storm had blown itself out sometime before dawn, leaving behind a washed and broken world. Caleb stepped out onto the porch and stopped cold. For a long moment, he couldn't move at all. He just stood there staring. The ranch he'd bled for looked like a giant hand had swept across it in the night. The south fence was gone, not damaged. Gone. Posts lay scattered across the mud like broken teeth, wire tangled and useless in the wet grass. Half the barn roof had peeled away, and inside he could see the sky where there ought to have been shelter. The pasture that had held his cattle was a shallow lake now, brown and still, with fallen branches poking up through the surface. Eli came out behind him, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Then he saw it too. His mouth fell open. "Oh," the boy whispered. "Just that." "Oh." They walked out together into the ruin. The mud sucked at their boots with every step. Caleb moved slow, his eyes taking in each new wound. A watering trough had been flung clear across the yard and split down the middle. The chicken coop leaned drunk against the fence, its wire torn open. 2 of his older cattle lay dead in the draw where the water had caught them. Eli stopped when he saw them. His face went white. "Don't look, son," Caleb said gentle. He steered the boy away with a hand on his shoulder. But he made himself look. He'd raised those animals from calves. They came to the fence line last. Caleb crouched down and picked up a broken post, the very one he and Eli had set just yesterday morning. The earth they'd packed so tight had washed clean away. He turned it over in his hands and felt something inside him sink like a stone dropping down a well. "How bad is it?" Eli asked. His voice was small. Caleb didn't answer right off. He was doing sums in his head. The fence, near a quarter mile of it, would need new posts, new wire, and days of labor. The barn roof would take lumber he didn't have, and money he didn't have neither. The trough, the coop, the lost stock, the flooded pasture that wouldn't dry for weeks. He added it up. Then he added it again, hoping he'd made a mistake. He hadn't. Caleb sat down right there in the mud, the broken post across his knees. He'd already been behind before the storm. He'd stretched every dollar thin as paper, just keeping the place alive these past years. There was nothing left to stretch. No savings hiding in a jar. No banker in town who'd lend to a man whose land had just washed halfway to the river. The numbers only pointed one direction, and it was a direction that made his chest go tight. Sell. The word tasted bitter as old coffee. Sell the ranch. Sell the land his wife had walked, the ground his daughter was buried in beneath the cottonwood. He'd sworn he never would. He'd sworn it 100 times. But swearing didn't rebuild a barn. Swearing didn't feed a growing boy. Eli crouched down beside him, careful, watching his face the way a person watches the sky before a storm. "Caleb, we can fix it, right? You said 2 of us can do more than one. We fixed the barn door. We can fix all of it." The hope in his voice near broke Caleb clean in half. Caleb set the post down. He couldn't meet the boy's eyes at first. He looked out over the drowned pasture instead, at the gray water shining under the pale morning sky. "Eli," he said. His voice came out rough. "Some things a man can fix with his own 2 hands, and some things cost more than he's got." Eli went very still. Caleb made himself turn and look at the boy now. Look at him full. He owed him that much. "I might not be able to keep this place," Caleb said quiet. "And if I can't keep the ranch, I don't know that I can keep you fed and sheltered proper. We may have to find you somewhere better, somewhere safe." The color drained from Eli's face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes filled fast, brimming, spilling over before he could stop them. "You said," Eli whispered, "you said I wouldn't be alone." The evening settled over the ruined ranch like a heavy blanket. Caleb sat by the fire, though he wasn't warmed by it. He stared into the flames without really seeing them. The plate of beans on his knee had gone cold and untouched. Outside, the wind pushed at the walls, softer now, spent from the night before. Every so often, the loose barn boards creaked and groaned, reminding him of all he'd lost. He heard Eli's footsteps before he saw him, The boy came in from the back room, still dressed, still wearing his boots, though the hour was late. His eyes were red-rimmed, but dry now. He'd done his crying earlier, out by the fence, where he thought Caleb couldn't hear. But Caleb had heard. Every sound of it had scraped him raw. Eli stopped in front of the fire. He stood there a moment, working up his nerve. Caleb could see it in the way he squared his small shoulders. "I've been thinking," Eli said. Caleb set the plate aside. "Eli, it's late. You ought to be sleeping." "I can't sleep." The boy's chin lifted. "Not till I say this." Something in his voice made Caleb go quiet. He waited. Eli drew a breath. When he spoke, his words came steady, though they trembled at the edges. "You keep saying you got to find me somewhere better, somewhere safe, a better place." He shook his head slow. "But you got it all wrong, Caleb. You think a better place is a house that don't leak, a barn with a whole roof, money in a jar." He swallowed hard. "That ain't what makes a place better." Caleb opened his mouth, but Eli pushed on before he could speak. "When my ma was alive, we had almost nothing. Some winters we near starved, but I wasn't scared then. You know why?" His voice cracked. "Because she stayed. She was there every morning and every night. That's what made it home. Not the walls. Her." The words landed on Caleb like blows he couldn't dodge. "After she died," Eli went on, "Martha had a wagon full of nice things, money enough for a new dress, and she put me out on the street like an old boot she didn't want no more." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he swiped it away quick, angry at it. A fancy life didn't make her stay. Nothing made her stay, because she never chose me. He stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could see how his whole body shook. "But you chose me. You put your coat around me when I was sitting in the dirt. You told me I wouldn't be alone no more. You promised." His voice broke wide open now, the tears coming free. "So, don't you go telling me some other place is better? There ain't no better place than beside the person who promised to stay. I don't need a perfect ranch, Caleb. I don't need any of it. I just need you." The fire popped. The wind sighed against the boards. Caleb couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The boy's words had reached down into a place he'd sealed off years ago, a place he'd buried under grief and guilt and fear, and they'd cracked it wide open. He'd been telling himself he was protecting Eli, sending him somewhere better, somewhere safe. That's what he'd called it. But now, looking at the tears on the boy's face, he saw the truth plain for the first time. He wasn't protecting Eli at all. He was doing exactly what Martha had done. He was choosing to leave. Only he'd dressed it up in pretty words to hide the shape of it. He'd lost his wife and daughter because the winter took them. That grief he couldn't have stopped, no matter how he tortured himself over it. But this was different. If he lost Eli now, it wouldn't be because life took the boy away. It would be because fear made him let go. Caleb rose from the chair. Slow. His knees felt weak beneath him. He crossed the small space between them and dropped down so he was level with the boy, looking straight into those brimming eyes. "You're right," Caleb said, his voice thick. "God help me, son, you're right." He reached out and took Eli by the shoulders, firm and sure. "I made you a promise, and I aim to keep it." His jaw sat hard. "I don't know how yet, but I'm done running. We're going to fight for this place. For you. For us. And come what may, I ain't letting you go." Morning came gray and cool over Whitmore Ranch. Caleb was up before the sun, out by the broken barn, staring at the wreckage the storm had left behind. Boards lay scattered across the yard like matchsticks. The far fence had collapsed in on itself. A whole corner of the barn roof had peeled away in the night, leaving the beams bare against the sky. He didn't know where to start. He only knew he had to. Eli came out to stand beside him, a hammer already gripped in his small hand. Neither of them said much. They just looked at the work ahead, work that seemed too big for two pairs of hands. Then Caleb heard it, a rattle of wheels, the steady clop of hooves. He turned toward the road and saw a wagon coming up the rise, then another behind it. Dust lifted soft in the early light. He shaded his eyes with one hand. "Who is it?" Eli asked. Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't, because he recognized the first wagon now. It belonged to Tom Harlan, who ran the feed store in town. And behind Tom came the Pruitt brothers on their mules, tools slung across their backs, and behind them, more. A whole line of them, stretching down the road far as Caleb could see. The wagons rolled into the yard and stopped. Men climbed down. Women, too. Some with baskets of food, others with hammers and saws. Children spilled off the backs of wagons and stood staring at the ruined barn with wide eyes. Caleb walked toward them slow, hardly believing what he saw. "Tom," he said, "what's all this?" Tom Harlan pulled off his hat and turned it in his hands. He was a broad man with a gray beard and a face weathered by years of sun. "Heard the storm hit you hard, Caleb." "Real hard." He nodded toward the barn. "Figured you could use some help setting things right?" Caleb shook his head. "I can't ask you all to." "You ain't asking." Tom's voice was firm, but his eyes were kind. "We're offering. There's a difference." One of the Pruitt brothers stepped forward. "You remember the winter of the big freeze, Caleb? When my little ones took sick and we had nothing? No wood, no food. Snow up to the windows." Caleb went still. "I woke one morning and there was a stack of firewood outside my door." The man went on. "A sack of flour, a slab of salt pork. Never saw who left it. Never got to say thank you." His jaw worked. "But I knew. Everybody knew who it was. Weren't but one man in this town who'd give away what little he had and never say a word about it." A woman with a basket spoke up next, her voice soft. "You left medicine on my porch when my mother was dying. I never forgot it, Caleb. Not for a single day." "My husband would have lost the farm," another said. "You paid our debt in secret. We only found out years later." One by one they spoke. Each of them carried a memory of a kindness Caleb had given quietly, expecting nothing in return. Kindnesses he'd near forgotten himself. He stood there in the middle of them, his throat too tight to speak, feeling the weight of years he'd spent believing he was alone. He'd thought his kindness had disappeared into the cold and the dark. But it hadn't. It had been out there all this time, waiting. And now it was coming home. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "You gave to us when we had nothing. Now it's our turn. Ain't right for a man to fight the whole world by himself." Caleb felt Eli's hand slip into his own. He looked down and saw the boy staring up at all these people, his face full of wonder, his eyes shining. "They came for you," Eli whispered. "No, son." Caleb's voice was rough. "They came for us." Tom turned and raised his voice to the crowd. "All right, folks, let's get to work. Barn first, then the fences. We got daylight to burn." And just like that, the yard came alive. Hammers began to ring. Saws bit into fresh lumber. Men climbed onto the beams and passed boards up hand to hand. Women set up long tables and laid out bread and stew and pie. Children hauled nails and fetched water, laughing as they ran. Caleb stood in the middle of it, watching the barn rise board by board before his eyes. The same community that had once watched a boy sit alone in the dirt now moved together as one, their hands building back what the storm had torn down. He picked up his own hammer. Eli picked up his. And side by side, surrounded by the neighbors who had not forgotten him, they began to rebuild. 1 week later, the courthouse in Willow Creek was fuller than anyone could remember. Every bench was packed tight. People stood along the walls, hats in their hands. Out on the steps, more folks waited, unable to fit inside. They had come from all over. The Pruitt brothers, Tom Harlan, the woman whose mother Caleb had saved. Face after face, all of them the same neighbors who had spent a week rebuilding a broken barn. Caleb sat at the front with Eli close beside him. The boy wore a clean shirt, his hair combed flat with water. His small hands were folded tight in his lap. "You scared?" Caleb asked, low. "A little," Eli admitted. "Me too." Caleb managed a small smile. "But we ain't alone this time." Across the aisle sat Martha. She wore a fine dress the color of deep wine, her hair pinned up neat. She looked calm, sure of herself, but her eyes flicked once to the crowded room, and something behind them tightened. Judge Samuel Reed took his seat. The room went quiet. "We are here," he said, "to decide the permanent guardianship of Eli Carter. I've heard much already. Today I mean to hear the rest." Martha's lawyer rose first. He spoke smooth and fast. He said Martha was Eli's lawful stepmother. He said blood and marriage were what the law protected, not the feelings of a lonely rancher. He said Caleb was a stranger who had taken in a grieving boy and now could not even keep a roof over his head. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he stayed still. Then Samuel Reed leaned forward. "I have a question for Mrs. Voss." Martha stood, smoothing her skirt. "Of course, Your Honor." "When you left this boy on the street," the judge said, "did you know about the land his mother placed in his name? The land near the railroad?" Martha's smile did not move. "I did not, Your Honor. I only learned of it later. That is why I came back, to do right by him." A murmur ran through the room. Samuel Reed lifted a paper from his desk. "That's strange, because I hold here a letter, written in your own hand, dated 3 days before you abandoned Eli Carter." He held it up. "In it, you write to a land agent. You ask him the value of the railroad property, and you ask him how a guardian might come to control it?" The room went dead silent. Martha's face drained white. That is not." "It bears your signature," the judge said quietly. "Do you deny it?" Martha's mouth opened. No words came. Her hands trembled at her sides. "You did not abandon this child because you had nothing," Samuel Reed went on, his voice growing hard. "You abandoned him because you believed a frightened, desperate boy would be easier to control when the time came to claim what was his. You threw him into the dirt like he was worth nothing, and then you came back only when you thought he was worth something." "That's a lie," Martha whispered, but her voice cracked. She looked around the room and found no friend in it, only the faces of people who had watched Eli sit alone in the dust, people who would never forget it. Then Eli stood. Caleb reached for him, but the boy was already speaking, his voice small but steady. "I don't care about the land," he said. "I never did. I just wanted somebody to stay." He looked at Caleb, his eyes wet. "And he stayed. He stays even when it's hard. That's what family is. Family is who stays when things get hard." No one moved. Somewhere in the back, a woman wiped her eyes. Samuel Reed set the letter down gently. He looked at Eli a long moment, then at Caleb. "Children are not raised by names written on paper," he said. "They are raised by the hands that protect them and the hearts that stay." He lifted his gavel. "I find that the true home of Eli Carter is with Caleb Whitmore. Guardianship is granted, permanent and full." The gavel came down, and the whole room erupted into cheers. The cheers spilled out of the courthouse and into the street. Folks slapped Caleb on the back as he came down the steps. Hats went up in the air. Somebody let out a whoop that echoed off the storefronts. Caleb kept one hand on Eli's shoulder the whole way, guiding him through the crowd, and Eli leaned into him without thinking twice. The Pruitt brothers were already loading their wagons. Tom Harlan grinned wide beneath his gray whiskers. "Come on, then," Tom hollered. "We didn't fix that barn just to sit around looking at it. There's a supper waiting." The road back to Whitmore Ranch was full of wagons and riders and children running alongside. The dust rose gold in the late afternoon sun. Caleb rode slow, with Eli beside him on the old mare Eli had learned to love. The boy sat straight in the saddle now, sure of himself, nothing like the small frightened child who had once sat alone against a storefront. When they crested the last rise, Eli caught his breath. The ranch spread out below them, but it did not look the way it had a week ago. The barn stood tall and clean, its new boards pale against the older wood. Lanterns hung along the fences. Someone had strung them earlier in the day. Tables were being carried out into the yard, and the smell of roasting meat drifted up the hill. "They did all this," Eli said softly. "For us." "For you," Caleb said. Then he shook his head. "No, for us. You're right about that." They rode down together, the evening filled with music and laughter. A fiddle sang out sweet and quick. Women set down plates piled high with cornbread and beans and slow-cooked beef. The children chased each other around the barn, while the older folks settled onto benches and told stories. Eli moved among them, like he had always belonged there. He fetched water. He held a baby for a tired mother. He listened, wide-eyed, as the Pruitt brothers argued about who was the better shot. Caleb watched from the porch steps. He watched the boy laugh. Really laugh, head thrown back, the sound bright and free. He watched the neighbors he had once kept at arm's length gather close, filling his yard with warmth. And he felt something loosen in his chest, an old, tight knot that had been there so long he had stopped noticing it. Tom Harlan came and sat beside him with a plate. "You did a good thing, Caleb," Tom said. "Folks did a good thing," Caleb answered. "All of them. I just held the door open." Tom chuckled. "Well, however you want to tell it." He clapped Caleb on the knee and wandered off toward the fiddle. The stars came out one by one. The music grew softer. Slowly, the neighbors began to leave, wagons rolling off into the dark with sleepy children tucked in the back. One by one they called their goodbyes, and Caleb thanked each of them by name. At last, the yard was quiet again, just the crickets and the low crackle of a dying fire. Eli sat on the porch step beside Caleb, worn out and happy, his eyelids heavy. "That was the best day of my whole life," the boy murmured. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the dark shape of the barn and the fences fading into the night. Then he looked at the boy beside him. "Eli," he said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it right." Eli looked up. "When I found you on that street," Caleb said slow, "I thought I was saving you. I thought that was the whole of it. A man doing a kindness for a boy who needed one." He shook his head. "But that ain't the truth. Not near all of it." He took a breath. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions, waking up, feeding the horses, going to bed, waiting for nothing." His voice roughened. "You gave me a reason to get up again, son. You gave me back my purpose, my hope." He looked Eli square in the eye. "You didn't just need saving. You saved me right back." Spring came to Willow Creek soft and green. The hills that had been brown and cracked all winter turned gentle with new grass. The creek ran full and clear. And Whitmore Ranch, once quiet and half-broken, hummed with life from sunup to sundown. Eli was up before the rooster most mornings now. Caleb would come out to the barn and find the boy already there, forking hay to the horses, talking soft to the old mare like she was an old friend. And she was. Eli had a way with animals that even the Pruitt brothers had come to respect. A skittish colt, that would let no man near would go still and calm the moment Eli laid a hand on its neck. "Boys got the gift," Tom Harlan said one morning, leaning on the fence. "Don't see that often." Caleb only smiled. He saw it every day. The ranch had grown too. New calves stumbled after their mothers in the far pasture. The fences stood straight and strong, mended by many hands over the long winter. The barn Tom and the others had raised still smelled of fresh-cut pine. Where there had once been ruin, there was now plenty. But it was Eli who had changed the most. The boy stood taller. He looked folks in the eye. When neighbors came by, he greeted them by name and asked after their families, and he meant it. The children of Willow Creek trailed after him like he was some kind of hero, and maybe, in his own quiet way, he was. He had stopped flinching when someone raised a hand near him. He had stopped waiting for the goodbye that used to feel like it was always coming. He belonged. Anyone could see it. One evening, when the chores were done and the light was going soft and gold, Caleb called Eli into the house. "Come here a minute, son," he said. "Got something I want to do, and I want you to see it." Eli wiped his hands on his trousers and came inside. Caleb stood by the fireplace. In his hands, he held a wooden frame, plain but sanded smooth, made by his own hands over many quiet nights. And inside the frame was Clara's letter. The very letter Eli had found, folded in the wooden box all those months ago. The words his mother had written, trusting a good man to keep her boy safe. Eli's throat went tight. "Your mama wrote that," Caleb said gently. "She believed in me before I believed in myself. Seems to me a thing like that ought to be where we can see it every day." He lifted the frame and set it on the nail above the mantel. He stepped back and looked at it. There. Now she's watching over both of us. Eli stared up at the letter. His eyes shone in the firelight, but he was smiling. "She'd like that," he said. "She'd like it here." "I think so too." They stood a moment in the warm quiet. Then Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out something small, wrapped in a bit of soft cloth. "Been working on this a while," he said. His voice came rough, the way it always did when he was feeling something deep. "Meant to give it to you today? On account of it's been a whole year since you came to this ranch." He held it out. Eli unwrapped the cloth with careful fingers. Inside was a wooden carving. It was small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, but every line of it was cut with love. A tall cowboy stood there, hat on his head, one hand resting on the shoulder of a boy beside him. The boy looked up at the man, and the man looked down at the boy. You could feel, just from the shape of them, that neither one was ever going to walk away. Beneath their feet, carved deep into the base, were two words: "Never alone." Eli read them once, then again, and then he couldn't read anymore because the tears had come, warm and fast, though he was smiling through every one of them. "You made this," he whispered. "For me. For us," Caleb said. "Always for us." Eli held the carving tight in his hand as they walked out to the barn. The sun was still climbing, warm on their backs. Two horses stood saddled and waiting, breathing soft in the cool morning air. "Thought we'd take a ride," Caleb said. "Just you and me. Seems fitting today." Eli slipped the carving into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Then he swung up onto the old mare like he'd been born in the saddle. A year ago, he wouldn't have known how. A year ago, he'd been a scared boy sitting in the dust, sure that nobody in the whole wide world wanted him. Now he sat tall. They rode out together, side by side, across the green hills. The grass brushed against the horses' legs. Birds lifted up from the brush and wheeled across the wide blue sky. For a long while, neither one spoke. They didn't need to. There was a kind of talking that happened between them without any words at all. They came to the ridge that looked down over the whole ranch. Caleb reined in his horse, and Eli stopped beside him. Below them, lay everything they had built. The mended fences, the new barn, pale and strong, the cattle grazing lazy in the far pasture, the little house where Clara's letter hung above the fire. "Look at all that," Caleb said quiet. Eli looked. His chest felt full, like it might burst. "Hard to believe it was ever any different," the boy said. "It was, though." Caleb rested his hands on the saddle horn. His eyes went far away, remembering. "This place was near dead when you came to it. So was I, if I'm being honest with you. I'd been walking through my days like a man half asleep. Didn't let nobody close. Figured if I never loved anything again, I'd never have to lose it." Eli turned to look at him. His stepmother's cruel words came back to him sometimes, in the dark, but they came less often now, and they didn't cut so deep. "You were scared too," Eli said. It wasn't a question. "I was." Caleb nodded slow. "More scared than you knew. That day I found you on that street corner, part of me wanted to keep on riding. Told myself I couldn't save nobody. Told myself I'd already failed the folks I loved." He looked at the boy. "But then you looked up at me, and I couldn't ride away. Wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had." "I remember," Eli whispered. "I remember the way you put your coat around me. You said I wouldn't be alone anymore. And I meant it, every word." They sat quiet a moment. A warm wind moved through the grass and made it ripple like water. "We came a long way," Eli said. "Through the court, through the storm, through all of it." "We surely did." Caleb's voice caught. "There were times I thought I'd lose you, son. Times I was so afraid I nearly did the coward's thing and let you go. But you wouldn't let me. You reminded me of the promise. And you were right. I'd have lost you, not because life took you, but because I was too scared to hold on." He shook his head. "I won't ever make that mistake again." Eli reached across the small space between the horses and put his hand on Caleb's arm. "You're my pa," the boy said simply. "You know that, don't you? Not because of any paper, because you stayed." Caleb had to look away for a moment. When he looked back, his eyes were wet and shining, but he was smiling like a man who had finally set down a heavy load he'd carried too long. "I know it," he said. "And you're my boy, now and always." The two of them turned their horses and rode slow along the ridge as the day wore down. By the time they reached the high field, the sun was sinking low, painting the whole sky in gold and rose and deepest orange. They stopped there together and watched it go, father and son, not by blood, not by law, by choice, by love, by the simple, stubborn act of staying when the world got hard. The sun slipped down behind the hills, and neither of them was alone. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.